Do you know your story? You know, it was Erik Erikson who in the mid-1900s coined the phrase identity crisis. If there could be a label for our age, that seems to be a fitting one. The age of identity crisis, does that fit? It is difficult to understand what people mean today and what people understand and define simple phrases: mother, father, man, woman, baby, Christian, church. We live in an age of identity crisis. It's epidemic. Because I'm a bit of a nerd, I looked into Erik Erikson, the inventor of the phrase identity crisis. Erik Erikson's mother's last name was Abrahamson. He was born into a Jewish family. Her husband's name, Solomonson, but she was estranged from her husband when she got pregnant with Erik. So he never knew his biological father, never knew anything about him. So Abraham's son, Solomon's son, his mother fled in the shame of all of that to Germany and married a man named Hamburg. And so he was adopted into the name Hamburg, never understood anything about his biological father. And in his, he's a German-American, was a German-American developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst. He invented, when he moved to America to study at Yale, he invented his last name, Erikson. It has nothing to do with his heritage. So the inventor, do you understand? The inventor and the coiner of the phrase identity crisis was attached to 4 or 5 last names, never knowing his biological father. It seems that his story, Erik Erikson's story, is a lot of our stories. We may know our last name, we may know our family tree just fine, but have you ever wondered and questioned, who am I? What's my purpose? Why has God put me here? What is this life all about? Of course you have. If you're honest with yourself, of course we have. Every one of us has, because we struggle with that on some level. Even the most mature of us, even the most spiritually mature of us, we ask those questions sometimes. We see it in children and we see it in adults. It's the same story. You have kids, you have grandkids, when they're swinging on the swing, what do they say? Hey, look at me, look at me. When they're playing with their cars, they say, hey, look at me, look at me. Why do they do that? You know, Kurt Thompson, Dr. Kurt Thompson, in his incredible book called The Soul of Shame, he says this: we are all born into this world looking for someone who is looking for us. We are all born into this world looking for someone who is looking for us. Why do kids say, look at me, look at me, look at me? Have you noticed that in adults, by the way? Driving up in their new car, hey, look at me. They don't say it that way, but that's what they mean. Hey, look at me, look at me, look at me. We're all struggling in some level, even the most mature of us, with identity. And here's the big problem, is that for most of us, identity is a function of behavior. Behavior determines identity. I'll give you just a couple of examples. If you lose, you're called a loser. If you win, you're a winner, okay? If you mother, you are called a mom. Behavior tends to specify identity for us. If you sin, you are a sinner. Let's try this on the Ephesians. The Ephesians must have been saintly because Paul calls them saints. False. As we see in the letter, they're struggling with a whole lot. They're struggling with unity. They have Jews and Gentiles and they're fighting all the time. They're struggling with love. They're struggling in their marriage and their parenting. They're struggling between master and slave. They're struggling to understand and take hold of the gospel in its beautifully simple form. And they're struggling to live it out. They are not saintly, but Paul calls them saints. Why? Because we have it reversed. Behavior does not specify identity, it's the other way around. Identity precedes behavior. And so we, as saints, our identity is not in what we do. It's not based on how we behave. It's based on how Jesus behaves, isn't it? Isn't that a good story? Isn't that good news? It's all embedded in these first simple, short words of Paul's opening salvo in this great book. He says, you are saints. I need you to understand that. Not because you are saintly, but because your identity is in the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Yes, you may be struggling with an identity crisis, but that's something that is not so difficult, should not be so difficult for the follower of Jesus.